You think you'd never fall for it. A stranger promises impossible returns. A company with no real product. A deal that's too good to be true. You'd see through it immediately, right? Here's what nobody tells you. The people who lose everything to Ponzi schemes aren't stupid. They're doctors, lawyers, professors, and financial advisors. They're people who spent their careers making smart decisions. Until they didn't. Bernie Madoff didn't steal $65 billion from fools. He stole it from Nobel laureates, hedge fund managers, and the most sophisticated investors on Wall Street. And the psychology he used? It works on everyone, including you. Because Ponzi schemes aren't about tricking dumb people into obvious scams. They're about exploiting the exact mental shortcuts that intelligent, successful, careful people use to navigate the world. Stay with me, because once you see how the trap is built, you'll understand why the smartest people in the room often fall the hardest. Let's destroy a myth right now. The typical Ponzi victim isn't naive. They're actually more likely to be educated, financially comfortable, and confident in their judgment. Dr. Stephen Greenspan, a psychologist who literally wrote the book on gullibility, Annals of Gullibility, lost a significant portion of his retirement savings to Bernie Madoff. When asked how this happened, his answer was revealing. I trusted the people who recommended him more than I trusted my own analysis. And that's the key. Ponzi schemes don't target your intelligence. They target your trust, your relationships, your identity as someone who makes good decisions. In fact, the more successful you are, the more vulnerable you become. Because success breeds confidence. And confidence makes you less likely to question things that feel right. This is called the overconfidence effect. And it's the first crack in the armor that con artists exploit. Let's be clear about what we're dealing with. A Ponzi scheme is devastatingly simple. There is no real investment. There is no product. There is no genius strategy generating returns. There's just money coming in from new investors. And that money then being paid out to earlier investors as fake returns. That's it. The entire scheme is robbing Peter to pay Paul, dressed up in financial language. Charles Ponzi pioneered this in 1920, promising 50% returns in 45 days through international postal coupons. He collected $20 million, roughly $300 million in today's dollars, before the math caught up. Because the math always catches up. Because here's the fundamental problem. To pay existing investors, you need an endless stream of new money. The scheme requires exponential growth to survive. At some point, you run out of new investors, and the whole thing collapses. But here's what's fascinating. Everyone who studies Ponzi knows this is how they work. And yet, educated, skeptical, intelligent people keep falling for them. Why? The first weapon is affinity fraud. This is the practice of targeting tight-knit communities, churches, ethnic groups, professional networks, military veterans, people who already trust each other. The SEC has identified affinity fraud as one of the most common elements in investment scams. And the reason is simple. Humans evolved in tribes. Our survival depended on trusting our group. This isn't a flaw. It's a feature that kept us alive for millennia. Con artists exploit this by becoming part of the community. They attend the same church. They join the same country club. They share the same ethnic background. Bernie Madoff targeted the Jewish community with devastating precision. He served on philanthropic boards. He donated to Jewish charities. He became one of them. When someone from your community recommends an investment, you don't apply the same skepticism you'd apply to a stranger. You can't. It would mean distrusting your own people. And that's exactly what they're counting on. The tighter the community, the more effective the scheme. The more trust exists, the more there is to exploit. The second weapon is social proof. Psychologist Robert Cialdini identified this as one of the most powerful forces in human decision-making. When we're uncertain, we look to what others are doing. If everyone around you is investing, it must be safe. If respected people in your community are in, you should be too. This is rational behavior, most of the time. If a restaurant is packed, it's probably good. If everyone's running from a building, there's probably danger. But con artists weaponize this instinct. Early investors are recruited specifically to be visible. Their returns are flaunted. Their lifestyle improvements are showcased. They become walking advertisements. Look at what this investment did for John. He bought a new boat. He retired early. He's so happy. What you don't see is that John's returns are coming from your investment. And yours will come from someone else's. Until the music stops. In the Madoff scheme, Investors would boast about their returns at dinner parties. They'd recommend Madoff to friends as a favor. They became unpaid salespeople, recruiting new victims through genuine enthusiasm. By the time you hear about it, dozens of people you respect are already in. How could they all be wrong? The third weapon is exclusivity. Here's the counterintuitive genius of the most successful Ponzi schemes. They don't try to recruit you. They make it hard to get in. Madoff famously rejected investors. He'd keep people waiting for months. He'd turn down money, only to accept it later as a special favor. This triggers what psychologists call reactance. When something becomes less available, we want it more. It also triggers the scarcity heuristic. If something is exclusive, we assume it's valuable. And it completely inverts the sales dynamic. Instead of the con artist convincing you to invest, you're convincing them to let you in. You're grateful for the opportunity. You feel special for being accepted. Once you've worked to get in, you're psychologically invested before you've written a single check. This is why high-end Ponzi schemes feel nothing like scams. There's no pressure, no urgency, no desperate sales pitch, just an exclusive club that you had to earn your way into. The fourth weapon is early returns. In almost every Ponzi scheme, early investors make money. Real money. Money they can withdraw, spend, and show to friends. This serves two purposes. First, it creates social proof. Real people with real profits who will recommend the investment to others. Second, it triggers reciprocity, one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. When someone does something for you, you feel obligated to return the favor. When an investment makes you money, you feel loyal to it. You don't question it. You defend it. And most critically, you reinvest. Madoff's genius wasn't just attracting money. It was keeping money in. His stated returns were good but not unbelievable, around 10 to 12% annually, steady and consistent. Investors didn't cash out because why would you? It was working. Every statement showed growth. Every year was profitable. The illusion only breaks when you try to withdraw large amounts. And by then, it's usually too late. The fifth weapon is authority. We're trained from childhood to respect credentials, titles, and institutional approval. This serves us well most of the time. But con artists know how to manufacture legitimacy. Madoff was former chairman of NASDAQ. He had offices in a prestigious Manhattan building. He was photographed with politicians and celebrities. Alan Stanford was literally knighted by Antigua, Sir Alan Stanford, before his $7 billion fraud was exposed. Sam Bankman-Fried of FTX met with regulators, testified before Congress, and was featured on magazine covers as a financial genius. These trappings of authority aren't accidental. They're strategic. Every credential, every association, every press appearance is designed to trigger your authority bias. The mental shortcut that makes you trust people who seem legitimate. And it works. It worked on the SEC, who investigated Madoff multiple times and found nothing. It worked on sophisticated investors who did due diligence. It worked on journalists who wrote glowing profiles. If it worked on them, why wouldn't it work on you? Here's where it gets psychologically dark. Even when investors start to suspect something's wrong, they often don't leave. They invest more. This seems irrational. It actually is irrational, but it's also predictable. The first force is the sunk cost fallacy. You've already invested $100,000. If you pull out now, you're admitting that $100,000 might be at risk. But if you stay in, if you keep believing, there's still hope. So you invest another $50,000. Now you have $150,000 on the line. Leaving becomes even harder. The second force is cognitive dissonance, the psychological discomfort of holding conflicting beliefs. You believe you're smart. You believe you make good decisions. But you also suspect this investment might be fraudulent. These beliefs can't coexist. So your brain resolves the tension by rejecting the threatening belief. The investment must be legitimate, because if it isn't, what does that say about you? Research by psychologist Leon Festinger showed that when faced with evidence contradicting their beliefs, people often double down rather than change their minds. This is why Ponzi victims become the scheme's strongest defenders, right up until the collapse. And they do defend it, aggressively. If you try to warn someone in a Ponzi scheme, you'll likely be met with hostility. They'll dismiss your concerns. They'll question your motives. They'll pity your lack of vision. This isn't stupidity. This is psychological self-defense. Admitting you've been conned doesn't just mean losing money. It means losing your identity as a competent person. It means facing the pity, or worse, the judgment, of everyone you convinced to join. Many Ponzi victims recruited friends and family. They vouched for the investment. They staked their reputation on it. To admit the scheme as fraud would mean admitting they led loved ones to financial ruin. That's not a math problem. That's an existential crisis. So they believe. They have to believe. Right up until the FBI shows up. And when the scheme finally collapses, the psychological damage often exceeds the financial damage. Because the victims don't just lose money. They lose their sense of self. Every Ponzi scheme ends the same way. The math is unforgiving. To pay returns to existing investors, you need constant new money. But investor pools are finite. Growth eventually slows. Withdrawals eventually exceed deposits. And then it unravels, usually fast. Madoff's scheme collapsed in 2008 when the financial crisis triggered withdrawal requests he couldn't meet. Within days, a $65 billion empire was revealed as fiction. FTX collapsed in less than a week when customers tried to withdraw funds that didn't exist. The collapse is always sudden because Ponzi schemes have no buffer. There is no real asset to sell. There is no actual value underneath. Just the trust of investors. And once that cracks, there's nothing. What remains is devastation. Retirement accounts gone. College funds evaporated. Life savings, decades of work, vanished. And survivors are left with the hardest question. How did I fall for this? So here's what I want you to understand. You would fall for it. Under the right circumstances, with the right con artist, exploiting the right psychological vulnerabilities, you would fall for it. Not because you're stupid, because you're human. Affinity fraud exploits trust, and trust is how communities function. Social proof exploits observation, and observation is how we navigate uncertainty. Exclusivity exploits scarcity instincts, and those instincts served our ancestors well. Authority bias exploits respect for expertise, and expertise usually deserves respect. These aren't flaws to be ashamed of. These are features of human psychology that work correctly 99% of the time. Ponzi schemes succeed because they're specifically designed to exploit the 1% of situations where these shortcuts fail. The con artist's job is to construct that 1% situation, perfectly and meticulously, using decades of knowledge about how human minds work. You're not fighting your own stupidity. You're fighting professionals who've made manipulation their life's work. So what protects you? Not intelligence. Smart people fall constantly. Not skepticism. Suspicious people get conned by playing to their suspicion. Not experience. Financial professionals lost billions to Madoff. What protects you is understanding. Understanding that if something feels exclusive, that feeling might be manufactured. Understanding that if everyone you trust is in, that trust might be the vector of attack. Understanding that guaranteed high returns don't exist, and anyone promising them is either lying or deluded. Understanding that the moment you feel special for being invited, that's the moment to pause. The trap only works when it's invisible. Now you see it, and seeing it is the first line of defense. If this changed how you understand financial manipulation, subscribe. This channel breaks down the psychology behind the patterns that shape our lives. The invisible forces most people never notice. Comment below. Have you or someone you know encountered a scheme like this? What were the warning signs? What do you wish you'd known? This is a space without judgment, because these traps are designed to catch everyone. And if you want to understand how the same psychology that powers Ponzi schemes powers the casinos and betting apps draining bank accounts right now, this video explains exactly how gambling hacks your brain. Click it. Understand the system. That's the whole point.